Welcome. Good morning. All right. Welcome to First Universalist Church of Yarmouth. My name is Ann Turner. I'm a worship assistant on our worship council, and I am so glad to be greeting you all this morning. A warm welcome to our friends on Zoom and to those of you here in the sanctuary. Today is the final Sunday of our 2-week break given to our staff, and we will welcome Reverend Hillary back to the pulpit next week. Some of you might notice that she's hiding in the pews this morning, but she's not on duty, so pretend you don't see her. Today we will continue to explore this month's theme of living love through the practice of story. We are pleased to have several members of our congregation share their writings with us this morning. If you look in your Sunday morning news, or if you read your email this morning, you will see that the zine that many of you contributed writings for is finally available to everybody. There's a link in there, and you can see the PDF and read all the beautiful writings. We are also especially grateful to Beth Russell, who will be providing music for today's service. It's wonderful when we have somebody who can pinch hit when someone is sick. At First Universalist, our mission is to explore our faith, embrace this community, and engage the world as spiritual seekers. May we take these words to heart. If this is your first time to our congregation, we invite you to fill out a connections card, which is located in front of you in your pew, so we may connect you with programs here that will interest you. You can drop this in the offering plate when it is passed later in the service. For those joining us with young children, there is nursery care available during our service for babies and toddlers. The nursery is located right out this door, down the hallway to the left. Following our service, you are all invited to join us for coffee hour downstairs in our gathering room. This is our time for friendship, fellowship, great food, and answers to all your questions at the welcome table. Now, take a moment to greet your neighbor. Ask them what story they could tell about January so far, but the Cliff Notes version to be expanded upon downstairs in coffee hour. Yep. Mine is January so far has been preparing this service and being a little nervous about it, but what's yours?
Well, I guess a bunch of things, but Cliff-Note-wise, I've just got my mind on the fact that my 5-year-old mom just came back last night from Portugal.
She went to Portugal?
Last summer, she went on a cruise with 2 other people older than me in Asia, in the Pacific Ocean. She's on stuff, and she's a breast cancer survivor.
Oh, nice.
So that's why her journey is more on my mind at the moment than mine.
That's amazing, amazing. All righty. Take a deep breath and hold that thought and continue your stories downstairs. Our call to worship this morning is a reading from Reverend Scott Taylor called "Let Us Drink from the Stories That Sustain Us All." As we learn of those who have gone before, the way in front of us becomes clearer. As we weave together our individual tales into a common story, our loneliness lessens, and the ever-present web of our oneness is revealed. As we listen deeply to each other's difficult stories, with tenderness and trust, we descend into the longings and the learnings and the hopes and the fears of the humanity that we share. Beneath the wells from which we drink, there is a deeper well that feeds them all. Come, let us tell each other tales of our thirst. Let us drink from the stories that sustain us all. And Reverend Bob Janice Dillon also says, stories, paradoxically, are both a step back from our lives and a step further into our lives. In the short term, stories are an escape from our own life. But in the long term, stories provide us with meaning and context, allowing us to live more fully. Stories remind us that life is not just a set of problems to solve, but a meaningful tale to be read with care. And Mariana Tupper is our first contributor to the zine, and she will read 2 of her poems.
Testing. Good morning. I'm thrilled to see that there's at least one princess in the audience today. It's very appropriate for my first poem. Kitchen ballet. The only things you have to know about dancing in the kitchen are how many twirls it takes you to get across the floor, and whether there is room for an arabesque between the refrigerator and the table, and that if there is something really delicious smelling cooking on the stove while some really great music is playing, keep dancing, because the food will taste even better, seasoned with tiny flagged notes. That was inspired by our daughter, Lily. And this next one is also involves her because it's about 10 years after my pregnancy with her. 10 years later. 10 years after gestation, my baby has learned to swim underwater again. She has reached the age of adventure, morphed into a seal, plunging into the pool over and over, her hair streaming like seaweed, her eyes round inside her goggles. 10 years ago, I saw her swim into the far corner of an ultrasound screen, away from the sharp point of the amniocentesis needle. Smart kid, I thought, choose your battles. But I didn't think it'd take me this long to find for her a bigger pool to explore. Now I am immersed with her in a chlorine bath, sitting on the pool's steps, watching her show me what she can do. Brave kid, I think, daring to try new ways of moving and breathing after 9 years of terrestrial life. And me, I'm still observing, still getting to know this person. She plunges again, then raises her head to smile at me as if to ask, "How can you be content to just sit there?" I reach out my hands and she takes them. We count 1, 2, 3. Simultaneously then drop beneath the surface, our eyes wide, staring at the murky, bubbling images in front of us.
And now, please rise as you are able for our opening hymn, number 1007 in your teal hymn book.
If you look in the hymnal, You will see at the end that it says, "Sing this section several times," which seems dangerously random. So after the three verses, let's just take the ending and call it good.
There's a river flowing in my soul. There's a river flowing in my soul, and it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my soul. There's a river flowing in my heart. There's a river flowing in my heart. It's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my heart. There's a river flowing in my mind. There's a river flowing in my mind, and it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my flowing in my mind. Please remain standing and join us in the unison affirmation, which is printed in your order of worship. We are united in seeking to increase love with justice and to constitute a free church open to all people. Mindful of our past and drawing upon modern knowledge, we respond to the spiritual needs of persons and to the common good in community, nation, and world. We cherish the integrity of each individual and search for truth with reason as our guide. We respect differences of opinion and strive to be a democratic community. We are concerned with this world and open to the future. And now it's time to light our chalice and have time for wonder, and I need as many kiddos as I can up here to help me this morning. All right, we don't have a lot of kids today. You'll have to, that was some lovely dancing.
I know. I took dance classes.
Do you?
Me too.
Do you remember what we say?
We light our chalice in peace and
That's right. Okay, say it again. We light our chalice in peace and friendship. Blow, 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 blow. Good job. Can you stay up here? I want to talk to you guys. Now, if I get down on the floor, somebody might have to pick me up. Let's do it over here. Okay. Just in case I need that. So I have a question for you guys. What's your favorite part of bedtime? Wow, that's a new one. What's your favorite part of bedtime? Reading books. Do you have any idea why we tell stories? Why do we read books? Any idea? What? So you have good dreams. That's one of the best reasons I know. I was remembering that when my little girls were little, one of the books, or a whole lot of books that I used to read to them, was something called the Berenstain Bears. Did you ever read any of those? Yeah? What are they about? Bears. Yeah, they sure are. Well, those Berenstain Bear books tell stories about, you only have one? They have books about all kinds of things, like going to the dentist, going to school, having birthday parties. I mean, you name it, they've got a book about it. And I think one of the reasons they do that is because so many things for children are new or exciting or confusing or even scary. And when you have a book about it, it makes it easier to figure it out. It makes the world easier to figure out. So I have another question for you. A really, really, really long time ago, before there was electricity or cars, or maybe even houses, I don't know. What do you think the very first people thought the very first time they heard thunder? Scared, yeah. And you know what they did about that? They told stories. They made up stories about what that thunder was. I remember when I was little, somebody told me that somebody up there was bowling. Can you imagine? But it made it not feel scary, right?
Yeah, but
It isn't true? You don't think so? No. Not true, that's right. But stories help us figure out the world. And that's why we tell them, because they make things not so scary. Or they make exciting things even more fun. When we have stories, things get more fun, right? Or less scary, that's right. So we're going to sing you guys, first we're going to do the Unitarian blessing. Do you remember the children's blessing? We are Unitarian, Universalist, people of open minds, loving hearts, and helping hands. Okay, we're going to sing you guys out.
You got up by yourself. You got up by yourself. This reading is also by Reverend Scott Taylor, and it's called Wooed into This World. Who dreamed you into being? What stories sat in their heart as they imagined what you would become? Who helped you imagine your story? Who helped you see your place in the story of the world? And what maybe matters the most, who helped you understand that you could be the author of your own unfolding? All of which is a way of asking, who listened? Who listened until you could hear yourself speak, until you trusted the voice that is your own? And now that you know what it's like to have the tale of yourself be heard into being, how might you midwife the story of another into existence? You know the kinds of stories I'm talking about, those kept in cramped spaces of silence for fear of how hard and narrow this world of ours can be. Who needs your listening so their story can be set free? Whose story needs held in your heart so it knows it is worth entering into the world? We say it is about listening, but really, it's about love. It is through the affection that our stories are born. They are wooed into this world. Never forget that, nor this. It is through loving the stories of others and the stories of our own that we discover they love us back. So be it. Amen. And now Janice Cooper will share her story with us.
Thank you and good morning. I started writing on a regular basis, maybe 20, 30 years ago, and most of what I wrote were about the events of the day, political stuff and things like that. But when I really dug deep and wrote about my own life, I seemed to have really only one story. And that story I've approached in many different angles and ways. This short piece was written last spring as Mother's Day approached. So it's entitled, A Mother's Day Message from a Childless Mother. When my daughter was young, my friend would introduce me to other children as someone who had a child. This was her shorthand way of reassuring the child that I would understand them and act appropriately. I thought this made sense. Then my only child, Becky, died suddenly in an accident when she was 23. Was I still a mother? If so, for what purposes? Government and employment forms rarely ask about dead children. English has no word for my status, like widow or orphan. I don't know if any language is more expansive or sympathetic. Nevertheless, I continue to think of myself as a mother, for my thoughts dwell on her always. I carried her body in mine. I bore her. I dried her tears. I laughed with her. After spending more than 2 decades rearing her, I hold a special place in my heart, not just for her, but for all children, from the very young to young adults. After Becky died, another friend warned me to avoid movies that depicted the death of a child. I believe I was a good mother. She told me so. I prided myself for this accomplishment more than anything else I had done. I was attentive to her moods and tried to minimize her traumas. I was not smothering. I urged her to take risk, and she grew up brave and confident. When she was young, I took jobs that allowed me to be home when she got out of school, when she would be most likely to want to talk to me. I dreamed up imaginative parties for her birthdays and the neighborhood. Although she could be emotionally volatile, I usually figured out how to reassure her. Even now, years later, I think I know how to act with kids. The way I speak to them is sensitive to their age. I avoid condescending baby talk and also words they would not yet understand. I speak honestly to teens as equals. My years with Becky taught me much, but to the rest of the world, I am an oddity. Of course, I am not the only person to suffer this loss. Vast areas of the world are filled with grieving parents. Because I am different in America, however, I avoid bringing up the subject of her death. On the other hand, I refuse to eliminate mentioning her when I am reminded of one of her funny or outrageous escapades. In that sense, she lives on, although I pray my companion will not ask the next question, what is she doing now? If I know the person only slightly, I lie or change the subject. I am not prepared to go deep. When the subject of her death does arise, people stumble for the right words. Death is always a conversation stopper, but this one is one of a kind. The death of one's child is a parent's worst nightmare. That kind of loss is too awful to contemplate or discuss. In the more than a dozen years since Becky died, I have come to terms with my loss. At some level, I am always sad, even when I am enjoying myself. It is the undercurrent to my life. I can find joy in wonderful friendships and in the things Becky loved too, like a beautiful sunset, children, music, and laughter. In one way, however, I am different from people with children, at least when their relationships are good. I do not want to live forever. Some days I feel like I have had enough. That may not be unique to childless mothers, but I think it is more common. For now, I try to live fully as she would want.
Please join me in another moment of silence as we hold all that was shared here today and all that remains in our hearts. And I offer this prayer. Meet me in the heartbeat between what has been and what will be. Meet me in the flicker of our eternal flame. We need not face this moment alone. Blessed be. Today's half-plate offering will be shared with Maine Boys to Men. This organization engages men and boys in advancing gender equity and creating safer communities for all. They offer unique experiential workshops to address the development of boys in the context of their relationships and cultural environments, families, schools, community organizations, and peer culture as the key agents of change in the life of boys. Please support their courageous commitment to end male violence and self-harm. For those in the sanctuary, we'll be passing the offering plate to one another, and those joining us online are invited to make your offering using the donate button in the order of worship. Thank you for your generosity. Thank you, Beth. Please rise as you are able and join in our song of thanksgiving.
The next reading is by Reverend Emily Gage. In some ways, it could be argued, each one of us is a community or a collection of stories. That is, in part, what this month's theme is all about. But we must also ask this question in a broader sense. What does it mean to First Universalist congregation to be a community of story? Part of what we do, of course, is listen to one another's stories. We do this in Joys and Sorrows portion of our worship service. We do it in our informal conversations at coffee hour or while our kids play. We witness shared celebrations of our stories, whether they're baby dedications or memorial services or other rites of passages. We create narratives of what could be in our shared faith in action gatherings and marches. Sometimes just sharing our story and having it be held by others is helpful. Sometimes hearing a story that sounds like your own, but with a different ending, can give you hope. Sometimes listening to someone whose perspective is totally different opens up new worlds and new understanding. In our religious community, we are shaped by the stories we encounter. In our religious community, we create a shared story of who we are and who we may become. So, I would like to introduce Larissa Sellers to tell us one of her stories.
My story is entitled Doris. My mother-in-law, Doris Shore, was in my life for the last 19 years of her life. When we met, she had many reasons to be cool toward me, but because I came to her via her much adored son, she welcomed me. In the beginning of my relationship with Doris and my father-in-law, Jack, we had fun. They adored my children, and they would drive halfway across the country from Philadelphia to Minneapolis to visit us. When they did, they wanted to meet our friends and see what our life was like. They even went to Iowa with us, where my mother lived, to have Thanksgiving at her home there. Their life had not been easy, but in retirement, they spent time traveling by car, visiting what were then elder hostels. Doris, whose intellect had never been allowed to flourish, loved the content of the elder hostels. Jack loved socializing, and for a few years, they found their bliss. But then Jack's health began to decline, especially his cognitive abilities. Jack and Doris moved into independent living, then assisted living, and eventually Jack moved into skilled nursing. None of this would have been possible except that one of Jack's sisters left them enough money to get into Lafayette Redeemer, a retirement home populated in equal measure by Jews and Catholics, all from Northeast Philly, where Doris had lived her entire life. And I want to let you know she was the queen of Lafayette Redeemer. A word about Doris. I always described her as warm crazy, as opposed to my mother, who had been cold crazy. I have numerous stories recounting Doris's lunacy, like the time Joe Lieberman was nominated Al Gore's running mate, the first Jew nominated a U.S. vice president. Doris called us extremely upset. Why wasn't Arnie nominated? She was very serious. We had to explain to her that her beloved son was not in politics. She knew that, but still. After Jack moved into skilled nursing, Doris grew deeply depressed. It was the first time she and her husband weren't living together. Friends had already been dying off, and that started happening more frequently. She began to lose her energy, her health, her appetite. Life was all about loss. After unsuccessful attempts to get Doris to try an antidepressant, she would say, why would I do that? I decided the best tack was simply to listen. I didn't try to make anything better or to fix anything. Doris and I had already bonded, but during this time and after Jack died, our bond strengthened. Our final times together were during the last weeks of her life. She had congestive heart failure and was slowly dying. She did not want to die. As she got weaker, I asked her if she was afraid of dying. No, she said, I'm just worried about Arnold and Elliot. Do you think they will be okay? I smiled, which was likely not the right response, but Arnold was in his 60s and his brother Elliot his late 50s, and it just struck me that mothers don't ever stop worrying. I said I thought they would be okay, but I understood how natural it was to worry. Doris didn't want to die. She wanted to keep on being with us, making us crazy, saying outrageous things, and being a fierce presence in our lives. I still miss her. And now my friend Kathy McKenna.
There we go. Good morning. When I was 12 years old, my mother married a quiet man who worked for the Soil Conservation Service. At that time, he was helping map the soils in the wilderness of northern Piscataquis County. And so, in the fall of 1984, my mother, sister, and I moved into a rambling old farmhouse in Dover-Foxcroft. As you might know, Dover-Foxcroft is a pretty small town. About 4,000 people living along a scenic river, 2 main streets, 2 stoplights, and a big white church on the main square. After settling my sister and me into our new schools, Mom set about finding the family a church. The big white church in the center of town was, predictably, a Congregational church, and while Mom had nothing against the Congregationalists, she would never take us there. My mother, you see, was never one to take the easy way. She was not much of a joiner or a team player. Honestly, she was more of a heckle them from the sidelines kind of player. At some point in her mid-20s, she had fallen in with the Unitarians. And there, amongst the hippies, armchair intellectuals, and social misfits, she found her spiritual home. The problem was, there was no Unitarian church in Dover-Foxcroft. The nearest option was a Universalist church, up the road a bit in Sangerville. Now, if Dover-Foxcroft was a small town, Sangerville was hardly a town at all. It was just a jumble of white farmhouses clustered around an unusual green and yellow church. This lovely Victorian building, with scalloped shingles and elegant stained glass windows, was the First Universalist Church of Sangerville. It had been built about 100 years earlier when the lumber boom had produced a brief burst of prosperity in the area. By the 1980s, though, the town had fallen on hard times. The mills were closing down, and the population was dwindling as young people left to seek their fortunes elsewhere. But a tiny congregation of Universalists was still there, worshiping every Sunday, hosting chicken pie suppers, and somehow finding a way to keep the old boiler going through another winter. On a typical Sunday morning, you might find 25 people in the pews, most of them older, many of them related. The congregation was held together by two couples, a charismatic carpenter and his potter wife, and a Christmas tree farmer and his wife, who served as our church pianist. The two couples lived in a sort of commune with the potter's cousin, who was an accomplished painter, and her brother, who was an electrician and yoga enthusiast. My favorite character of the congregation was John, a Harvard-educated classicist who had fled civilization to live simply in the North Woods. He read Homer to his children by lamplight. These were my mother's kind of people. And it was to this church that my mother brought us most of the Sundays of my most formative years. Now, I say we attended church most Sundays because, truth be told, our family were not the most reliable of churchgoers. It wasn't that my parents had any theological or spiritual reservations about the church. In fact, they felt right at home among the quirky congregants of First Universalists of Sangerville. Our lackluster attendance was due to a much more profound difference between us and the good people of Sangerville. My parents, you see, were not morning people. Despite coming from old Maine stock, my mother did not grow up rising at the crack of dawn to milk the cows or feed the chickens. Her parents owned the local garage up in Patton, and their success in business had allowed their eldest daughter to develop the soft habits of city folk. As for my stepfather, well, he was raised by intellectuals in Massachusetts. Deep down, both of my parents felt that a person had the right to sleep in a bit, at least one day a week. And neither of them could bring themselves to get out of bed before 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning. This presented quite a challenge because services at the First Universalist Church of Sangerville started at 9 o'clock. And this being rural Maine, pretty much everyone was in the pews and ready to go about 8:50. Now, those of you with children know that the process of getting 2 adults and 2 children out of the house on time can involve a bit of drama. Our house on Sunday mornings felt more like opening night at a fast-paced Broadway musical, one that had been produced on a really short timeline. Shortly after 8, my mother would appear and announce that this Sunday we were going to church. My stepfather would look up from his first cup of coffee, the Bangor Daily News, not 100% conscious. I'd be upstairs, parked in front of the bathroom mirror, most likely with a curling iron. It was the 1980s. No one knew where my younger sister was, but after some hollering, we usually confirmed that she was outside with the dog playing in the woods behind the house. At about 8:15, the hollering began in earnest. Discussions about who had eaten breakfast and who needed to shower were conducted with great intensity. Laundry baskets were emptied in search of clean clothes and matching socks. Accusations were leveled at those who had finished the milk or left the iron on. By 8:45, things would get really tense. Often, my sister and I would flee the chaos and hollering to wait in the car. And from there, we would watch silently as my mother ran through the house, fully dressed in her hat and winter coat, hollering for us all to get into the car right now. Sometime around 8:50, Mom would emerge from the house thoroughly exasperated, only to discover that everyone was already in the car waiting for her. At this point, she would start swearing in a way that our neighbors who attended more Christian churches would surely have seen as a violation of the third commandment. And then she'd jump in the front seat, throw the Subaru into gear, and peel out of the driveway, headed up the road to Sangerville. Now, according to Google Maps, it should take 9 minutes to drive from our house in Dover Foxcroft to the Universalist Church of Sangerville. I assure you, it can be done in much less time. The Sangerville Road, as it is sensibly called when one is traveling toward Sangerville, is a narrow, winding strip of asphalt through fields and woods across one particularly narrow bridge. There are a couple steep hills, so steep, in fact, that given sufficient speed, a Subaru station wagon fully loaded with a family of 4 could easily take flight. The journey was particularly hair-raising in the wintertime, say after a snowstorm. It is no surer sign of God's benevolence than the fact that my family always arrived safe and sound at church. Safe and sound, but approximately 5 to 7 minutes late. If we were lucky, the congregation would already have begun the first hymn, and we could slip into the pews relatively unnoticed. More often, though, we'd burst through the front doors just as Reverend Alex was starting the opening prayer. In either case, everyone would turn and look at us in a way that implied some mix of pained sympathy and mild irritation. As a teenager, I was, of course, mortified. After about a year of this, my mother came up with a way to avoid the weekly white-knuckled drama of getting our family to church on time. A less creative person might have decided that the solution to our problem was simply to get up earlier on Sunday mornings, or perhaps to make more efficient preparations the night before. But to my mother's mind, the problem was not her family's inability to get out the door on time. It was the unreasonably early start time of Sunday services at the First Universalist Church of Sangerville. As she often asked, usually while flying down the Sangerville Road at great speed, what kind of church meets at 9 o'clock in the morning? And so she began her one-woman campaign to change the start time of Sunday services. I remember her making the case to Reverend Alec. He nodded diplomatically and suggested that she should bring this up with the church council. Before the council meeting, Mom rehearsed her reasons on me. A later start time, she argued, would allow people to chat a little before services. Folks would have more time to bake something nice for coffee hour. It would give more people, particularly the much coveted families with children, more time to get to church. She had a long list of reasons that usually culminated with the fact that the Congregationalists for God's sakes, met at 10. Honestly, I don't remember how long my mother waged her campaign. I only remember a couple of awkward conversations at coffee hour when she made her case to folks who were too polite to point out that her family was the only one that had trouble making it to church on time. Still, my mother would not be deterred, and finally, after months, or maybe it was years, of campaigning and lobbying, she wore them down. Or perhaps the church council finally took pity on my poor stepfather. Somewhere along the line, he'd become church treasurer, and he often found himself in the uncomfortable position of being the only member of the church council to support my mother's proposal. Whatever the reason, the council finally acquiesced. Well, not entirely. 10 o'clock seemed too radical a change for a congregation that had been meeting at 9 for 100 years or more. But in demonstration of the great generosity of spirit Universalists are known for, the council finally voted to change the start time of Sunday services to 9:30. My mother was triumphant. By then, she had convinced herself that the later start time would make everything better at church. We'd all arrive more rested with trays of freshly baked muffins. legions of young families would flock to the Universalist Church of Sangerville now that they had more time to get ready in the morning. I'd love to tell you that postponing the start of Sunday services made all the difference. But as far as I can remember, the Universalist Church of Sangerville experienced no discernible transformations in the wake of the change. No new families appeared. The old folks still showed up at 9. And for the rest of my high school career, Sunday mornings at our house played out pretty much as they had before. Only the process of hollering and rifling through laundry baskets began a little later. My sister and I still found ourselves sitting in the car, waiting while our parents chased each other around the house at 9:15 or 9:20, and we still sat in tense silence in the back seat as my mother tested the limits of physics and our Subaru station wagon on the back road to Sangerville, where we all arrived, safe and sound, at church, approximately 5 to 7 minutes late.
Thank you, Kathy. Now please rise for our closing hymn, number 346, Come Sing a Song with Me. Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me, that I might know you're mine. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the wintertime. Come share your dream with me. Come dream a dream with me. Come dream a dream with me, that I might know you're mine. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the wintertime. Come walk in rain with me. Come walk in rain with me, that I might know you're mine. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the wintertime. Come share a rose with me. Come share a rose with me, that I might know you're mine. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the wintertime. Thank you, Beth. Our closing words this morning are from Reverend Sherry Woodbury: to speak, listen to, and care for our stories. May we have the courage to speak or write the stories within us that need to be told, the stories that make up our lives. May we listen with a loving mind and heart to the stories of others' lives, others here within this church, and others in our wider community and world. Let us choose with care the stories we teach our children, remembering that all of our stories have power and that all of our stories are connected, for all of life is one. In the name of all that is sacred in these gathering hearts, may it be so. And now let's share our unison benediction. For those who come here seeking God, may God go with you. For those who come embracing life, may life return your affection. For those who come to seek a path, may a way be found and the courage to take it step by step. Thank you all. See you downstairs.